Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Verbal to Visual podcast. I am your host, Doug Neal, and on this show, you get to listen to one-on-one coaching calls with folks who are developing and using their sketchnoting skills. Today's episode lives at the intersection of three topics: project-based learning, distance learning, and sketchnoting. This conversation is with Jessica Talbot from a little bit earlier in the summer, who is making plans for the start of the 2020-2021 school year with either a distance learning or hybrid model in mind. And the first project of the year is all about symbols, which has some great overlap with sketchnoting. So I hope this one gives some ideas for teachers and parents out there who'd like to share these skills with their students. I also wanted to mention that if you're catching this episode within about the first week of it going out, I am going to be hosting a webinar for teachers on August 13th. That webinar is connected to the resource kit called Sketchnoting in the Classroom, which Jessica is using and references throughout our conversation. And the purpose for this upcoming webinar is to help teachers who have picked up that resource kit weave it into whatever distance learning or hybrid model you'll be using for the upcoming school year. So if you'd like to connect with other teachers and chat about your plans for the upcoming year, do come join us within that webinar by signing up for Sketchnoting in the Classroom if you're not already a part of that resource, or logging in and checking out the events tab if you already are. That webinar will be recorded and the replay available within that resource kit in case you're not able to make it live. You can find links as well as the show notes for today's episode at verbaltovisual.com/12. Let's get into it. All right, Jessica, thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to chat with you. To kick things off, I'm going to throw it to you right away to let folks listening know who you are, where you're coming from, and what you're up to with your sketchnoting skills.
Thanks for having me today. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I work for a project-based learning school called Explore Community School. And I discovered sketchnoting through a colleague of mine that works in Indiana that also works for a project-based learning school. And he told me about sketchnoting, and I discovered the class and was really excited because it aligns well with a unit on symbolism that we're working on in my school for next year. And also just thinking about virtual learning and how we can give kids some optional modalities to kind of show their learning as they're, away from their classroom and away from their teachers.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a nice intersection that I see there, and have started hearing from other educators as well, in the role that sketchnoting can play. I guess even before this COVID crisis, there was a nice combination of, educators wanting to use sketchnoting as an instructional tool to kind of help reach the more visual learners in their classroom, and then also wanting to share this skill with their students and help them develop their visual note-taking skills. So that combo of using it as a teaching tool and helping students develop this skill has kind of always been interesting and at the core of this resource kit that I created, Sketchnoting in the Classroom. But then with this transition to online learning and teachers across the country and world kind of trying to figure out what exactly that looks like for them, it's almost like I see a renewed interest in both sides of it, but maybe particularly the instructional side, since the teaching process and of course the learning experience just looks a lot different, or will look a lot different next year. So it's an interesting time to be exploring how to weave these tools and skills into the learning experience. So it will be fun to chat with you about your specific situation. Do you want to chat about that a little bit in terms of what your role is in your school and what you'd like to chat about today?
Sure. So my role is the director of academic operations, and a large part of my role in that is I work with the community to gather information about problems or passions we have in our community or things that we're interested in learning about. And I gather that information and then I help write the project based learning curriculum. Our kids have 3 projects a year and they're multidisciplinary. And they end usually with an exhibition of learning. So, a lot of my work this summer has been translating what um, kids and families are interested in currently and writing the new unit for next year, which will be how can symbols unite and inspire our community. Um, and so gathering resources for that. And then now my work is kind of translating those resources for our K-5 students and teachers to think about how will we do our project-based learning virtually if
Mm.
that's a scenario that we need to be planning for, which it seems likely that in our state we're planning for a hybrid model. And so I'm really thinking a lot about how sketchnoting can be helpful and how they're learning it in project-based learning, but how they can also use it in other content areas. And then thinking about um, feedback loops of like what's the teacher exchange going to be and how do we see like the work that our kids have done virtually and
Mm.
what can that submission look like and honestly, what how will we modify it for our youngest learners, our kindergarten through second graders, um, who really need that, like, teacher support and who may not have as much of it virtually?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Very exciting approach. I've always been intrigued by a project-based learning approach to education, and I guess I never heard enough specifics to get a full picture. But it was helpful to hear that at the approach that your school takes is like 3 of these big projects in a year. That feels like a nice amount of time to be able to spend like that much time on each project. Seems like the allows for this potential for so much depth in what students experience and learn around that particular topic and project. Just out of curiosity, what were some of the projects from this past year?
Sure. So the way that our program is set up is that all kids K-5 learn about the same topic in the first and the third trimester. And then in the second trimester, teachers sort of elect to do a past project or they can write a new project. So last year, our first project was about looking at time and looking at the fossil record and using that record to help us make predictions about our climate change. And each grade level took a different period in history and studied that period. And then, as a part of that study, visited different regional fossil sites
Hmm.
and learned about the different animals, plants, the climate, and what the globe was like during that time. And that unit culminated in an exhibition of learning where the students turned our school into a museum.
Hmm.
Um, and every grade level kind of had their own way of showing their learning through the museum. Our second term projects, that's the one where each grade level is doing a different project. So in kindergarten, our kiddos were doing inventors and entrepreneurs. And so they looked at and identified problems around them and then used the design thinking process to create an invention. And that culminated in a panel of presenting to the community of sharks, similar to the show Shark Tank.
Nice.
Um, So they were pretty proud of their inventions, and all of them were approved naturally. Our first graders did a unit that was called What is Beauty? And they explored different cultural representations of what different societies think is beautiful and what they found beautiful. And then they each created different products at the end for an art gallery of things that they thought were beautiful, different using different art mediums. Our second grade did what does it mean to be a superhero? And they studied cartoons and action figures. And then they studied children who have done heroic acts in their community. And then they chose a social justice cause and became superheroes and created their own comic books and capes and masks. And that exhibition was a wax museum. Um, our third graders learned about role playing and peaceful conflict resolution through game design. So we worked with an organization called Heroes Guild, and the kids use their mechanics of their role playing game to create their own characters, worlds, and settings. And then our exhibition of learning was kind of like a game design, a game time with your family, where they got to use their worlds and their characters that they created. And then our fourth graders did an inclusive library project where they researched different inclusive texts and they created texts for our kindergartners. And then they researched and polled our kiddos for what their favorite books were and what types of library books they wanted in our new library, and how we could make sure that it was an inclusive way of looking at books as doors, windows, and mirrors. So doors to other learning, windows to things that are similar to you, and mirrors for things that you can see. I think I said that a little wrong, but you get the idea.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And then we didn't have a third grade project or a third term project last year because Nashville had a pretty severe tornado, and then we were out of school for COVID. So we just felt like that it wasn't the right time to be trying to figure out how to do project-based learning online. So
makes sense. Well, very cool. Yeah, that gives a nice sense for the types of topics that y'all explore within each of those and what those projects look like. And it's cool to hear both the question or the topic at the core of that project, but then also the specific exhibition of learning at the end of it. I just like the overall structure to that. Seems very, very worthwhile to me. Where do you feel like would be a good jumping in point to think about what you'd like to do in the coming year with the, remind me of the specific name of the project you're going to start the next year with?
So next year, we're going to start the year with the question, how can symbols unite and inspire our community? So kids will start out learning about like what symbols are and what does it mean to be inspired. And they will look for our core values symbolized in children's literature. And then from there, they will start learning about sketchnoting, practicing a lot of the skills that you laid out in your course. And once they've done that icon journal work, then they will create their own kind of like a logo for their own identity of like what they think is important, who they are, what they're passionate about. And once they've done that round of design thinking, then they will start thinking about, we're linking in some resources from Creative Clarity, and they'll start thinking about a large scale marketing product. And so each kid will be drafting a design item from a flag, a mascot, a brochure, or a core value logo. And so they'll learn about creative thinking, and they'll use some visible thinking routines to kind of go through the marketing and design process for making one of those products. Um, so they'll kind of use sketchnoting and what they learn to think about like the symbolism in those products and how they can make sort of their why come to life. And the goal is at the end of the product, and as they critique, the very end of the unit, they'll learn about voting, and the kids will actually go through a series of voting and campaigning on their products. And then whatever products are selected, those will be the ones that we try to fabricate. So right now, our school doesn't have a mascot or
Hmm.
doesn't have a school flag. And so really kind of giving them that ownership of like, this is what we designed, and how can we bring it to life, and then giving them voice and selecting that for the community.
Hmm. That sounds very cool. I have no doubt that I would have enjoyed that type of project in those middle school years, especially when that piece about helping to identify well, determine the school's kind of a visual identity. Uh, Creating that sounds like such a empowering project for students to take on. Um, and it sounds like you've got the details and the sequencing of that really well laid out. Um, do you feel like there are any kind of open question marks or potential challenges that you're imagining that you might want to talk through today?
I think a potential challenge I'm thinking about is I'm really grateful that you have the link shared so that they can be accessible for kids and teachers. So that was really exciting. I think a challenge I'm thinking about is once kids are practicing the skills through the sketchnoting, and really that's going to be like our mechanism for helping them sort of start in that way of thinking of like, this is an idea that I have, how do I represent it? So I'm wondering about like once the teacher is delivering the lesson virtually, and the kid is creating, but then how to show what the kid created to other kids, and also to
Mm.
get that good like loop back and feedback from the teacher. So that's something I'm really thinking a lot about, especially for our younger kids, our K2 kids.
Mm.
Just was wondering if any instructors that you've worked with have found that, or have they have they thought about that moving into next year's school scenario?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the that interaction piece is one of the challenges of moving to online education. Does your school currently use a particular um, like learning management software, like Google Classroom or something like that, where uh, kind of interaction takes place and assignments are shared and that sort of thing?
So right now we don't we're sort of low tech by design initially. But then last spring really had to pivot. So we're thinking this year we probably will use Google Classroom. And just, since it has like the single sign in feature, and just it seems to be like most compatible with most devices. Um, so I think that is going to be the platform that we use, and thinking about, just which parts of the day will be synchronous and asynchronous learning. Um, but we're just not really sure about uh, the submission piece, I guess, of creative thinking is a little challenging.
Right. Um, and to swing back to something you mentioned earlier, uh, are you did you mention that you're kind of hoping for a hybrid model as well? And would that mean some in person and some online? Or is there kind of still a question mark around that too?
I think there's a lot of question marks right now, but
Yeah.
it seems like what they were leaning towards as of last week was some students all virtual and some students all in person. So would be hybrid, but there would be some children that were not um, coming to school at all.
Hmm.
So those are the children that we're really trying to think through as far as so much of project-based learning and this creative work is just being around other people and using those 21st century learning skills. So we're thinking about how do we use things like sketchnoting to continue to help them to scaffold their creativity, but then also like how does the teacher then have access to it other than like we can always do the photo and submit, but then you're losing kind of the interactive conversation piece that's so
Mm.
neat when they're creating in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you kind of just touched on the probably lowest hanging fruit in terms of how students are able to share their work with you, um, because of the ubiquity of good cameras on pretty much all cell phones now. That would be an easy way to kind of for students to be able to capture and share their work. But as you mentioned, that doesn't necessarily get to the benefits of kind of having a conversation about that work. Um, what what I've seen a lot of within the online learning platform that I use within Mighty Networks, and then also we've been using Zoom a lot lately within the new course that's kind of being built right now called Digital Sketchnoting. It's been fun to see folks share their screen to essentially like pull up the latest sketch note that they took on their computer and then share that screen with everyone while talking through it. And I guess there's a question, this is where uh, maybe the difference between fourth graders and first graders might come into play here, as far as the ease of technology use to do something like um, getting their creative work uh, on a window on their computer and being able to share that screen while talking through their work, either just one-on-one with a teacher in a video chat or more likely within kind of a group video chat setting. Uh, is, what are your thoughts on the prospects of that as a way for students to share their work for the benefit of that student sharing and the other students watching and having that conversation and instructors as well?
I think that could be a good solution. I'm also thinking that if they did the recording, like if they drew in your sketchnoting, how you have it set up kind of in different subtasks, if they did a couple of those and then you could almost do like a flip book of seeing like the progression if they just recorded it. That could be like another way that they could submit um, multiple work, but also could see their progression. Like if they were doing a couple of times of practice on the same icon or the same coloring. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, even just what you mentioned, the first thing we mentioned was using just like a camera on a cell phone to take a photo, but using a similar model, but kind of like amping up the potential level of engagement and conversation potential. Actually, just recording a short video on their phone while the student kind of talks through the work and flips through that sketchbook, like you mentioned. That sounds like it has some potential to record a short video and then upload that video to the Google Classroom, assuming that it can handle video files easy enough in that way.
Yeah, I think I'll have to think about accessibility of if all students will have access to that.
Right.
I think another question I had is just kind of generally what have other educators or other instructors, what are projects that they've done with sketchnoting?
Yeah, good question. So let's see. What have other teachers done with their sketchnoting projects? I might have to go back and watch. So one thing that I plan to do this summer, I'm not sure of the exact timing of it yet, so I haven't yet announced it. But in past years, I can't remember if this was last summer or 2 summers ago. I hosted a handful of webinars for teachers just to chat about, for those who have already been using sketchnoting in their classroom, chat about what sort of work they've done, address questions that teachers have as they're preparing for the upcoming year. So there are a handful of those webinars that live within sketchnoting in the classroom, kind of as the last unit. I think there's a handful of kind of additional resources where I've been sharing those past webinars. And I'm trying to think if any examples come to mind from those specific chats. I actually pulled up those specific lesson pages because I think I did some image captures. So one thing that I'm seeing that I remember being a helpful approach. So within the sketchnoting in the classroom resource, within kind of each of the skill building lessons, there's a short video of me kind of introducing that skill. And then there's some
Mhm.
sort of a follow-up activity that usually is contained on like a 1 or 2 page kind of printable PDF. So what one teacher did was kind of selected those skill building activities and made a little printable booklet, but then also kind of weaved in some other activities, maybe related to like specific content that the teacher wanted to introduce. So it was almost like a custom activity book that brought together some of the activities that I've included within sketchnoting in the classroom, and then other um, source material or other activities that you might want to weave in tied to the specific project that you're working on. So that could be something to think about in terms of giving each student kind of a common workbook. That's one thing I've seen. I've also heard from teachers about the benefits of when introducing new topics, new concepts, kind of developing this actually fits pretty well within the first project, developing a custom set of icons specific to the
Mhm.
big ideas of that unit. And when using those icons, as teachers are introducing those topics and as classroom discussions are going on, as those icons and their meaning kind of get reinforced throughout a couple of weeks or a month, what teachers have seen is that when it comes time for students to take a test or write a paper or do some sort of project with those ideas, they see students kind of doodling those icons in the margins, even just to like kind of remind them and like activate those particular ideas as they're doing whatever final project or assignment or exam connected to them. So I've heard that from teachers. Continuing to scroll. Yeah, lots of, various examples of some sort of sketchnoting journal. And you had even mentioned, I think, an icon journal related to the maybe early work with sketchnoting. What were you thinking for that icon journal? And did any of the couple of things that I just mentioned there spark any ideas for you?
Yeah, so I think I was thinking that before starting the sketchnoting, I will go through and create sort of like an exemplary um, in response to each of the lessons that you kind of gave. And then as kids are working, that it would be neat if they were creating those icons and thinking through. I have different content selected so that they would, for one day, they're thinking about symbolism from things that they hear. And so I selected a couple of audio clips, and then overlaid with that lesson is one of the mini lessons that you gave about how to create um, one of the icons or one of the skills. And so they'll do that first, and then they'll listen to the audio clips, and then in their icon journal, they'll record what that sound clip like made them think of.
Mm.
Or there was another one that was about where the kids are going to watch some silent videos, and they're thinking about like language as a symbol. So they would write down kind of like brief words for that piece, less about the sketchnoting in that one, but tying together the image and the words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's a couple of, so each time there's like a place where they're, reading an article or doing a thinking routine or watching a video. And then they're having time to build up that like mental imagery. So I think that was something that was really helpful. In one of the videos is you pointed out how when you're doing sketchnoting, you're not just like thinking about the content and creating all of these like drawings in your mind at the same time, but that each artist kind of has their bank of drawings to pull from.
Mm.
And so for kids just starting out, I thought a lot about like, well, how do we help them create that bank before we're asking them to create products that
Mm.
show symbolism or um, so hoping that like as they're going through that process, they're making more of a bank in response to each of these things. Given that like in this course, if you will, if in project-based learning, it's not really necessarily to master like a content. In this project, our content is a lot about marketing and creative thinking and going through the marketing process and participating in critiques. So it's not I mean it's great if they do remember those
Mm.
process, but it's it's more about like the skill development and them like envisioning themselves as like being a designer, or and then like later on like they'll crystallize the process. So it's a little bit different than if you're using sketchnoting to remember, like you said, main idea or historical events. Whereas in this case, we're kind of using sketchnoting as like a skill to help them build their idea of like words connected to images so that then they can create those products through marketing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there's almost to some degree like more it's almost a more tangible process as opposed to it just being um, a personal learning tool, which of course sketchnoting is great for. It's also has this ability to be a communication tool.
Mhm.
And it sounds like you're kind of getting at both of those, I think, with the process you described of, first helping students build up their own bank of visual vocabulary to be able to pull from, and then kind of using that bank in this design process to communicate a sense of identity. Yeah, I see that. I see that working well. And yeah, the types of activities you described for encouraging students to do that, from uh, audio clips and silent videos. I feel like you've got so much of this uh, in place in a well thought out way, and I see the you know it sounds like the biggest pieces for you are figuring out what that interaction looks like in the sharing component, um, which is challenging because of the uncertainties for the upcoming year and the accessibility piece in terms of what each student will and or may not have access to. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think this is really helpful though, just to hear like how others have done it, and I can definitely go back and look at those webinars as well. If you don't mind my asking, how did you get into sketchnoting?
yeah, no, I don't mind at all. Um, so for me, my entry point into sketchnoting didn't come until after kind of all of my formal schooling. Um, I lost kind of my interest in drawing at about the same time that it kind of stopped being a part of school experience, somewhere around like the transition into like third and fourth grade, I think, where things became pretty verbal heavy. Um, but in adulthood, as I was kind of continuing to read books on my own and wanted to explore topics, felt that I was kind of lacking a process by which to remember the things that I was learning. So I had kind of noticed that. Uh, I noticed not having that in my life, so that when I happened to stumble across a TED Talk by Sunny Brown called Doodlers Unite, something that just kind of clicked in my brain uh, as I identified, like, yes, like that is a skill that I want to learn. I think in the years prior, I had started to do a little bit of drawing just for fun, sketching of, I guess, what you might call urban sketching that some folks are doing. There's a pretty strong community around that, of just drawing things from your day-to-day environment and things you see out in the world. So I feel like I was primed for that moment when I came across the idea of doodling as a tool to support your learning and creative thinking. So I kind of went all in on it at that point and came across Mike Rohde's work, the Sketchnote Handbook, and kind of haven't looked back after that point because of how much I enjoyed kind of building my basic drawing skills again, but applying those to the topic or to the application of learning new ideas. Um, and it kind of seems like a never-ending rabbit hole that we can keep going down in terms of like how far to continue developing your individual sketchnoting skills, the different types of settings in which you can use those skills in terms of using them for your personal learning. But even there, it's like, okay, what does it look like to sketchnote a book versus a hour-long podcast versus a 2-hour documentary?
Mhm.
And then with the work that I'm doing now, using it as a instructional tool has been a lot of fun, and helping others develop these skills and use them in their own work, which tends to be kind of a combination of folks wanting to use it as a personal learning tool, But then also like the communication side is another big one. Folks who want to be able to share their expertise, whatever their work, whatever they're immersed in, being able to share that in the very visual online world that we all work in to one degree or another. So yeah, that might have been kind of a rambling description of my journey into sketchnoting, but it's been a pretty fun one.
No, that's super neat. I definitely have seen people do it, mostly at TED Talks.
Mm-hmm.
And so when my colleague told me about it, I was like, "Oh, that's exactly what I need."
Hmm.
So I was super excited about it, and I think it's just gonna be just a great tool for kids as a process in general of
Hmm.
just like, we don't all have to take notes in this way, and in just encouraging that thinking, um, I think could be really neat.
Yeah, yeah. And what I think I mention and hopefully reinforce enough within some of the videos within that um, sketchnoting in the classroom, that resource kit, is that I do think of sketchnoting as these, it's kind of like a variety of these individual skills that each student gets to combine in their own way, so that they can kind of like tailor the sketchnoting process or the note taking process in general, in a way that like works well for them. So that aspect of kind of each individual, each student being able to customize their process. I think that's what excites me.
Are you keeping a portfolio of student, either like children's or like adult students' work?
Yeah, so I think what's I've done that in various forms over the years. What's making that a little bit easier with the new learning platform that I transitioned verbal to visual to about 3 months ago, Mighty Networks is the name of that platform, is that it's much more of a kind of social platform by default, encouraging folks to kind of share their work as they work through whatever course they're taking. So in that sense, there's kind of a portfolio of student work that's kind of aggregating there. Uh, Last summer, I did put out a call. It's a little bit trickier with teachers because there's the kind of privacy question, and wanting to make sure that if you do uh, share student work, that you have the kind of permission to do so. So we do have a handful of examples from students. And actually, there's a video that I put out not too long ago. Well, I guess it was a while ago now, that showed an example of a teacher. I can't quite remember the grade level, but it was a combination of this teacher who had created a rubric for sketchnoting as a way to, help evaluate where students are at and help them kind of continue to grow their sketchnoting skills. A video in which I shared that rubric and also maybe 10 or so examples of student sketch notes. So that could be a fun one to go look at just to get a reference point, because I think that's what can be helpful, both for teachers and for students to see like, okay, what does a third grade sketch note look like compared to a fifth grade sketch note, and maybe even like at various times along the timeline of being exposed to sketchnoting and developing their sketchnoting skills. Uh, so it would be fun to kind of continue accumulating a portfolio of student work, and that might even be give some focus maybe to if we do a webinar this summer for teachers, to then be able to use kind of the sharing aspects of Mighty Networks to help teachers connect with each other again, but then maybe also show some examples of student work to help teachers kind of orient themselves in terms of what to expect. And then maybe when appropriate, even, develop this portfolio that teachers can pull from to help introduce sketchnoting to their students by showing work from other students. That could be a fun thing to try to build out within our classroom environment there.
Yeah, I definitely think that could be really helpful. Kids always prefer to see work that kids did over what
Mm-hmm.
the teacher did. We prefer to show them work that kids
Oh,
did.
yeah.
So just two questions. Is that rubric on the platform that I am on, the verbal to visual, or is that something you could share with me?
Yeah, it is available more publicly than that because I shared that video on YouTube, and there's a blog post around it as well. I just found the link, which I will share with you in our text chat within Squadcast, the tool we're using to have this conversation. And for folks listening, the title is called Grading Sketch Notes, Rubric and Student Examples. So if you Google that, or Jessica, if you follow that link from Squadcast, if you can see it, that will take you to a page that has that video, the rubric, and a bunch of student examples that I hope are helpful. It's fun. It's been a while since I've looked at this post, but I remember even when I shared it too. Um, I feel like a number of teachers got excited about being able to see examples from other students. So that's probably a good indication that it's time to do something like that again and get some more examples out there.
Yeah, that's really neat. And then the Mighty Networks platform form that you mentioned, is that the one that the actual courses are listed under?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
Mighty Networks is, yeah, where you access the course lessons, and where you can share your work. Um, that's where all of that takes place.
Okay. I don't think I really have any other questions. I'm really grateful for your time. And feel that I'm not sure if you would be open to it, but I feel pretty sure we'll have some kids that get super into this. So,
Hmm.
uh, if they decide to do any type of interview questions, would you be open to talking with some kids about just your journey?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. That sounds pretty fun, actually. And
We try to connect them with people who are really using this skill, but given all that's going on, we don't really have as much opportunity for that in this unit. So,
right.
but for kids that were super interested, I think they would enjoy just hearing about how you've experienced it. So that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I would absolutely be down to chat. Um, and yeah, I know, I feel like there are definitely still some like unanswered questions around the some of those specifics around uh, sharing student work and what the interactions between students and teachers looks like. So um, I'd be curious to hear if you find um, if you come to that a form of interaction that works well for you. I'd love to hear that because I'm sure all teachers are trying to figure out what that looks like right now, and I'll be on the lookout too for what other teachers are doing, and if I come across an approach, I'll try to share that with you. But thanks for talking through what you're up to and yeah, some of the specific kind of ways to introduce sketchnoting and help students build up their skills and then apply them in this cool way to a design and marketing project. I hope the rest of the planning throughout the summer goes well, and then that you and all the teachers and students that you work with have a good time with this next fall. It sounds fun to me, so it wouldn't surprise me if they really enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks so much for just talking and just providing the resources for teachers to help their kids be more creative. I'm really excited I know our kids are going to love this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. It was nice chatting, and we'll stay in touch.
All right. Have a great day.
I hope that you enjoyed that conversation and that it sparked some ideas for you educators out there. Maybe some ideas about distance learning, maybe some ideas about project-based learning, and maybe some ideas about sketchnoting. And as I mentioned up front, if you'd like to chat with other educators who are thinking about those things as well, come join us in our upcoming webinar within the resource kit, Sketchnoting in the Classroom. That webinar will take place on August 13th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And again, that will be recorded, so you will be able to watch the replay if you can't make it live. For links, head on over to the show notes page at verbaltovisual.com/12. So I look forward to chatting with other teachers there and also with sharing another conversation about sketchnoting with you in the next episode. Until then.